I'm not one to spend money on decor. But that day, as I was walking back to the grocery store with my son, I saw a little thrift store on the corner that I had never noticed before. In the window, there was a large painting with a dark wooden frame, slightly chipped at the edges. The painting showed a simple landscape, a clearing with some trees around it, and an orange sky like at sunset. I don't know how to explain it, but something about the scene made me stop. Perhaps the tranquility of that image made me imagine my living room more cozy. I went in, asked the price, and the seller said I could take it for 30 rays. I paid, thanked him, and went home, thinking I had gotten a great deal. That same day, I hung the painting on the wall above the sofa. It was perfect. It gave a feeling of calm to the environment. My 5-year-old son, Lucas, looked at the painting for a while and said, "It's beautiful, Mom, but it looks a little weird." I asked what he meant, and he shrugged, saying only, "I don't know. Weird." I laughed, finding his sincerity amusing, and we went on with our day. At night, while we were watching TV, I noticed that the light in the frame looked a little different. I couldn't say exactly what, but the branches of one of the trees leaned more to the left. I shook my head, thinking it was just an impression, and went to sleep. The next day, while tidying the room, I looked at the painting again, and that strange feeling returned. I was sure that the tree that had been leaning to the left the day before now seemed more upright. I spent a few minutes facing the painting, trying to remember exactly what it looked like when I bought it. I must have gotten confused, I thought. Maybe the position of the light changed perspective, or I was just tired. Even so, that feeling that something was wrong didn't leave my head for the rest of the day. Later, while serving dinner, Lucas pointed into the living room and asked, "Mom, who's the boy behind the tree?" My cold heart. I went into the living room and looked at the painting closely. There was no one there, just the clearing, the trees, and the orange sky. "What boy, son?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "What was there? Look, behind that big tree, right in the corner." He pointed with the spoon. "I don't mean to care and laugh. It must have been your imagination, dear." But that night, after he fell asleep, I went back to the living room, turned on the light, and stared at the painting for a long time. For the first time, I felt scared looking at that painting. The next day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. As soon as I woke up, I went straight to the living room and stood in front of the painting. The light was still there, but there was something new that wasn't there before. In the right corner, partially hidden by a tree, you could see the outline of a dark figure. It wasn't a stain or shadow. It was a human silhouette. My heart raced and my hands started to sweat. I took the painting from the wall and turned it over, looking for any signature or detail. On the back, just a yellow paper glued in the center, with the name M. Richter, written by hand, and the date, 1973. Nothing about the origin, nothing that explains it. I put the board back, took a deep breath, and tried to convince myself that it was some detail I hadn't written down before. During the afternoon, Lucas played on the floor with his cars, while I folded clothes on the sofa. Without lifting his head, he asked, "Mom, is the boy still there?" My stomach turned. I slowly turned my face towards the painting. The figure was no longer behind the tree. Now she was closer, in the center of the glade. It was a man wearing a hat, standing still, looking directly at the front of the painting. It had no face, just a dark spot where the eyes and mouth should have been. My body felt cold. I picked Lucas up without saying anything, and we left the room. I locked the door and went to the bedroom, trying to think of what to do. I am unable. The fear was paralyzing. I stayed in the room with Lucas for a while, trying to calm him down without letting on the panic I felt. He didn't seem scared, just curious. "Is he mad at us?" he asked suddenly. My heart skipped a beat. "Who, son?" he asked, even though he knew the answer. "The guy in the painting. He left the tree and is now closer." My vision became blurred, and I felt tremendous hands. I picked up my cell phone and called my mother, but the call didn't go through. I tried a friend's number, and all I heard was static. The signal always worked there. Opened the messaging app, but I haven't sent you anything. The clock said 3:24 p.m., but the light through the window seemed strangely dim, as if the sun was setting hours earlier than usual. I took courage, took Lucas by the hand, and unlocked the bedroom door. The room was darker than it should have been. The lamplight, which was always on, blinked intermittently. The painting was there, on the wall, but the landscape had changed again. The light was darker. The orange sky had turned to an opaque gray, like a storm about to break. The man was now even closer, almost at the bottom edge of the painting. It seemed that if I got a little closer, I would be able to see the details of the hat or the shape of the clothing. But the face remained a dark blur. Lucas opened my hand and whispered, "Mom, he's looking at us right now." Instinct caught me, put Lucas in my lap and ran to the front door. I turned the handle, but the door didn't move, even though it wasn't locked. I tried again, harder, and nothing. The air seemed thicker, difficult to breathe. I looked at the window. The street outside was not as usual. The neighboring houses had disappeared, and nowhere was there an endless expanse of trees, just like the ones in the painting. The ground seemed to be covered in a fine mist. I felt a chill go up my spine, and I hugged Lucas to my chest. "Stay with me, okay?" I whispered. He nodded, scared, but didn't cry. Look at the painting again. The man was no longer there. My heart raced. I didn't know where to look. The clock on the wall said 3:24 p.m., the same time as before. The light flickered, or it was getting heavier and heavier. It was then that Lucas mentioned to the corner of the room. Behind the armchair, in the dim light, I saw the silhouette, tall, motionless, with her hat tilted over her face. There was no doubt. It was the man in the painting. He didn't move, but I felt like he was watching us. The room suddenly became cold, and a strong smell of wet earth filled the room. My body wanted to run, but my legs simply stuck to the ground. Lucas whispered, "He's coming, Mom." The figure began to move. Not like someone walking normally, but like they were sliding along the ground, slowly, out of the shadows. Every step he took seemed to sugar the air in the room even more. The hat cast a long shadow over the face, and that dark blur where the eyes should have been seemed to look directly at me. I held Lucas tightly, forced myself to move, and ran to the kitchen. I tried the back door, but the lock was stuck. I looked at the window. The trees outside were closer, as if they were surrounding the house. The man in the hat appeared in the hallway, motionless, a few meters away from us. I could smell the damp smell of the earth growing stronger and stronger. Lucas began to cry softly, his face buried in my shoulder. The man tilted his head slightly, as if observing our occurrence. Then, without moving my lips, because there was no mouth there, I heard a deep, muffled voice echoing in my head. "The clearing is open! Time is up!" My entire body shivered. Suddenly, the kitchen light bulb went off and we were left in the dark. I hugged Lucas tightly and closed my eyes, expecting the worst. The ground shook slightly. The earthy smell became unbearable, and I felt a cold wind passing by us. When I finally had the courage to open my eyes, we were alone. The painting was still on the wall, but the clearing was now empty. The man was gone. I stayed there on the kitchen floor, holding Lucas for a time that I couldn't measure. When fear gave way to a modicum of rationality, I got up and went back to the room. The picture was different. The sky, previously gray, had special effects being orange, and the trees specifically like the day I bought it. There was no sign of the man, but something made me uneasy. The egg white, previously clean, now had marks on the floor. They were footprints. Footprints that started in the center of the painting and ended right at the bottom edge, as if someone had left there. I didn't think twice. I took the painting off the wall, leveled it to the backyard, and threw it on the ground. I took alcohol, struck a match, and set it on fire. The flames quickly consumed the wood, and the smell of wet earth filled the air once again. But the painting burned to ashes. In the following days, things returned to normal. The cell phone signal returned. The sunlight followed the correct time, and Lucas no longer revealed the man in the painting. But I still smell, from time to time, that faint smell of wet earth inside the house. Sometimes at night I hear a dry crackling sound, like twigs being stepped on. And sometimes when I walk by the room, I get the impression that someone is watching me, standing in the corner. I can't explain what happened, or why that painting seemed alive. All I know is that, since that day, I've never bought anything from thrift stores again. And every time I see a clarity in some photo or movie, my throat tightens, and the only thing I can think is, what if he's still out there, looking for another way out? Living alone has never been a problem for me. In fact, I've always liked the silence and the feeling of independence. My apartment is on the 3rd floor of a small building, without a concierge, on a quiet street. The intercom rarely rings, usually when I order food or my friend Carol decides to show up unexpectedly. But a few weeks ago, I started receiving strange calls in the early hours of the morning. The first time was on a Wednesday, at 3:02 a.m. I remember it well because the intercom ringing woke me from a deep sleep, and when I looked at the clock, I was surprised at the time. I answered with my voice still groggy, and heard a man say, in a low and slow tone, "Can I come in now?" I was speechless for a few seconds. I asked who it was, but the call dropped. I thought someone was drunk and confused on the intercom and went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. The intercom rang at exactly the same time. I answered faster this time, and the same voice repeated, "Can I come in now?" I asked again who it was, but the person was silent for a few seconds before hanging up. I stayed awake until dawn, with my heart racing and the feeling that something was wrong. In the morning, I went down and checked the gate. It was closed, with no signs of forced entry. I asked a neighbor in the yard if he had heard anything, but he said no. I tried to convince myself that it was a random prank, trying to scare someone. But that night, I set my cell phone to wake up at 2:55 a.m. and waited. At 2:55 a.m., the alarm clock rang and my heart was already racing before I even opened my eyes. I got up, went to the living room, and sat on the sofa, looking at the intercom. The early morning silence was suffocating. At exactly 3 a.m., the device rang. The sound, which had always been banal during the day, at that moment seemed to boom throughout the entire apartment. Answer without saying anything. The voice came clear and calm, as before. "Can I come in now?" I took a deep breath and asked, "Who are you? What do you want?" The person was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "I just want to come in." The intercom hung up. My hands were shaking, and a strange chill ran down the back of my neck. I decided to check the security camera using the cell phone app. The camera pointed at the front gate showed only the empty sidewalk, illuminated by the yellow light from the streetlight. No shadows, no movement. I switched to the internal camera in the entrance hall, which gives access to the building. Nothing. My head was spinning. If no one was at the gate, how could the intercom have rung? I stared at the fixed image of the sidewalk for long minutes. It was then that I noticed something. The time in the top corner of the recording was frozen. The clock said exactly 3 hours, and the image was frozen, as if someone had paused it. Even so, the intercom continues to ring. I was frozen looking at that frozen screen. The intercom no longer rang, but the camera image remained stuck at 3. I exited the app, opened it again, and nothing changed. The clock remained stopped. I decided to go to the living room window, which overlooks the gate. I looked down and saw exactly what the camera showed. Empty sidewalk, street light, everything the same. But there was something wrong. With no reflection from the glass, I could see the entrance to the building behind me. And there, in the entrance hall, a shadow stood before the main door. My heart almost stopped. I turned my face, but the hallway was empty. I looked at the glass again, and the shadow was still there, motionless, as if only the reflection could reveal its presence. I turned away from the window with my heart racing. I called the police, but the call is not complete, just a continuous call. I tried to call Carol, but the phone was dirty. The fear grew with every second. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and went back to the living room, not knowing what to do, other than wait for dawn. I sat on the couch and continued watching the intercom. At 3:05 a.m., the camera app returned to normal on its own. The clock started counting time again, and the street appeared in real time. Everything seemed normal, except for one detail. On the sidewalk, right in front of the gate, there were wet footprints, as if someone had just left there. But there was no sign of rain that night. I spent the rest of the morning awake, with my cell phone in my hand, and my eyes fixed on the intercom. When the sun finally started to rise, I took courage and went down to the entrance of the building. The footprints I had seen on camera were no longer there, but when I looked at the glass door to the hall, I saw damp handprints, as if someone had been leaning there for a long time. The strangest thing? The marks were on the inside. I almost ran back up to the apartment, locked the door, and pushed a closet in front. I called the building administrator and asked for access to the full recordings from that night. She found the request strange, but envied the file. I spent the whole day working up the courage to watch it. At night, with all the lights on, I opened the video on my laptop. The recording showed the gate at 2:59 a.m. Everything was normal. At 3 a.m., the image froze for exactly 5 minutes. When I returned, footprints appeared on the floor. I moved the filming to the entrance hall and almost dropped the notebook. At 3:01 a.m., the hallway went dark, as if something was blocking the light. Little by little, a silhouette appeared in front of the main door. He was a tall man, standing still and motionless. You couldn't see the face, just a shadow without features. At 3:04, a figure slowly tilted its head, as if looking directly at the camera. And then the mouth opened, but there was no sound, just the intercom in my apartment ringing non-stop. I paused the video and turned away from the screen, my breathing quickening. The intercom had rang again that night, exactly at that moment. I was trying to analyze what was selling. The man, or whatever it was, didn't touch the gate, didn't open any buttons. He just showed up and made the intercom ring. Play the rest of the video. At 3:05 a.m., the figure turned its back and slowly disappeared onto the sidewalk. At the exact moment the field of vision disappeared, the camera image returned to normal. I closed the notebook, scrolled through all the windows, and sat on the couch with my heart in my throat. I spent the night, awake, waiting for the intercom to ring again. It didn't ring. In the following days, everything was calm. No strange calls, no frozen images, nothing. But the fear did not go away. Every morning I woke up alone at 2:55 a.m. for no reason. Until last night something changed. At 3 a.m. the intercom rang again. I answered with a trembling voice. The same voice asked, "Can I come in now?" I couldn't respond. There was a pause and then the voice spoke again. "No need. I'm already in." At the same time, the intercom made that dry sound of the door being unlocked, followed by absolute silence. The cell phone froze. The lights flickered. And now, as I write this, I can hear footsteps in the hallway. They get closer and closer to my door. My name is Eduardo. I'm 32 years old, and at the beginning of last year, I moved into an old apartment in the city center. It was kind of an impulsive decision, you know. I lived in the suburbs, but the time lost in traffic was killing me. The apartment was perfect. High ceilings, wooden windows that creaked in the wind, and a narrow hallway that led to the bedrooms. The rent was surprisingly cheap, and Mr. Sergio, the owner, told me that the only detail was a door in the hallway that was always locked. The key was lost years ago, but it's just a storage room. Nothing important, he said, with a half-hearted smile. I didn't care at the time, but that door, with its worn wood and rusty handle, felt wrong. In the first few days, a calm routine. The noise of the city at night reminded me that I had finally freed myself from the endless bus rides. But it was on the third night that I heard it for the first time. They were short, almost imperceptible children coming from that door. I stood in the hallway trying to understand. It wasn't just a crackle of old wood. They were steps. Light, short steps, as if someone were barefoot. And every now and then, an almost whispered breath. I said to myself, "Old wood, imaginations of a tired guy." I went back to the room, but I didn't sleep well that night. The following week, things got weirder. I began to notice that the hallway had a strange smell at night, a mixture of damp and something slightly metallic, like rusty iron. As I walked past the door, I felt the smell getting stronger. I tried to ignore it, but on Friday, while watching TV in the living room, I heard something that made me freeze. It wasn't just steps. It was a voice, low, muffled, almost a whisper, coming from behind that door. It seemed humming. A simple, childish melody that sounded comfortable and familiar, but I couldn't place where. I got close, put my ear to the door, and held my breath. A song stopped. Total silence. And then, light pressure against the wood, right at my head, as if someone had put their ear to the other side. I immediately backed away and went straight to the bedroom, locking the door. The next morning, I called Mr. Sergio. He arrived, looked at the door, and got nervous. He said the building was old. The pipes made strange noises. I asked about the melody, the smell, the feeling of someone there. He shrugged, but avoided looking directly at the door. Before leaving, I said, Better not listen too much, Eduardo. Sometimes we listen to what we shouldn't. That stuck in my head. I spent the rest of the day with a weight on my chest. When night came, I made a point of locking the bedroom door again. But at 3 a.m, I woke up with a dry crack. I looked at my bedroom door. The handle was getting confused, slowly turning from side to side. I stood frozen, holding my breath as the doorknob turned slowly, as if whoever was on the other side was testing the lock. My heart was beating, so hard that it seemed to echo throughout the room. After a few eternal seconds, the movement stopped. I stayed there, motionless, until dawn. When I finally shouted the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. But there was something new. Damp footprints on the hardwood floor, coming straight from that always locked door to my room. The footprints were small, like a child's, and the metallic smell was stronger than ever. I spent the next day pacing the apartment, trying to find an explanation. Leaking water. Did someone break in? But who broke in just to walk around barefoot and touch my door? I called Mr. Sergio again, but he didn't answer. I decided to do something more direct. I grabbed a hammer and went to the locked door. Or I hit the doorknob, trying to break it. The metal was old and resisted less than I imagined. After a few knocks, the lock gave way. I slowly pushed the door open, and when it creaked inside, a strong smell of mold and rust filled the hallway. The light from the hallway barely reached the interior of the room. I took out my cell phone and turned on the flashlight. The room was smaller than I expected, with dingy walls and a cold cement floor. There was no furniture, just a worn rug in the center. But what really gave me goosebumps was the back wall. On it, there were collections of children's handprints, dirty with something dark like rust. Some were at adult height, others were very close to the ground. Below them, a shakily scrawled sentence, "Don't wake him up." I felt a knot in my stomach. The metallic smell was unbearable. I took a step back and stepped on something. When a flashlight illuminated the floor, I saw a dirty cloth toy, looking like a bear without an eye. And behind him, more wet footprints, leading to my bedroom door. I closed the door to the little room and pushed a closet against it. I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I took my cell phone and went to look for a hotel. But while I was using my cell phone, the screen froze and started playing that childish melody that I had heard before. The sound came straight from the speaker, even without any video open. The volume increased by itself, and the music became slower and more distorted. Suddenly, a hoarse voice appeared between the notes, whispering, "Why did you open it?" I dropped my cell phone and ran into the hallway. When I got there, I saw that the closet was tipped over. The door to the little room was open, and the wet footprints were now heading towards the exit. I followed the footprints with my heart in my throat. They went to the front door, but instead of stopping there, they continued to the kitchen. I entered slowly with the tremendous flashlight in my hand. The trail just ended up in front of the refrigerator. I took a deep breath and removed the door, but all I saw were the empty shelves. Then, the light from the cell phone illuminated something on the floor. The dirty carpet from the small room was now there, right in the center of the kitchen, and on top of him, the eyeless cloth bear. I took a step back and heard a crack behind me. I turned the cell phone in the direction of the sound. At the entrance to the kitchen, someone was standing. It was a small figure with pale skin and bare feet dampening the ground. The face was covered by dark, damp hair, and the body seemed fragile but immobile. The air grew thick, and a strong, rusty smell filled my throat. I tried to run, but my legs locked up. The figure took a step forward, then another. With each movement, the breathing became more audible, like a wet hiss. When I extrajudicially touched my face, I felt an unbearable shiver. The eyes were deep, without pupils, just whitish orbs that seemed to me to see perfectly. The mouth opened with a rigid smile, showing small teeth, like a child's. "You opened it. Now he's awake," he whispered. Before I could react, I heard a loud noise coming from the hallway, the bedroom door slamming loudly. The ground shook, and the metallic smell became even stronger. Reflexively, I ran out of the apartment, went down the stairs barefoot, and only stopped on the sidewalk, with my heart racing. I stood on the sidewalk, panting, with my mind confused. The building looked harmless from the outside, but I still felt that smell in my nose. I took out my cell phone, which was in my pocket, and saw that the screen still showed the children's music paused. I turned off the device, avoiding that feeling that someone was still watching me. I called Mr. Sergio immediately. He answered on the second ring, but his voice was strained when he heard who it was. "I told you not to open it," he said, before I even explained anything. I insisted, asking him to tell me what he was betting on. After a long silence, he whispered, "He was trapped there for years. Now he's gone." I couldn't spend the night on the street. I went to a hotel, but I didn't sleep a wink. The next day, I returned to the apartment with the idea of taking my things and getting out of there. When he opened the door, everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The hallway was dry, without the footprints from before, and the door to the little room was closed again, with the lock intact, as if it had never been broken. The cloth bear, however, was in the center of the room. I grabbed my backpack, threw what was inside, and got out of there. I never went back. But to this day, sometimes, when I leave my cell, phone next to the bed at night, the screen turns on by itself and plays that melody. And every time that happens, I smell rust in the air. After leaving that apartment, I tried to live a normal life, but some things were never the same. I changed cities, changed numbers, but the pattern persisted. At least once a month, the cell phone plays that strange melody, always in the early hours of the morning. I tried everything, changing the device, using antivirus, even leaving the phone turned off, but nothing in advance. Sometimes the music starts playing even when the cell phone has no battery. The smell of rust also accompanies me. On nighttime nights, I feel the air becoming heavy and metallic, as if something is hovering around me, testing the distance. Once I woke up and saw damp footprints in the hallway of my new apartment. Since then, I've slept with the door locked and a knife next to the bed. But deep down, I know it's no use. Last week, I decided to call Mr. Sergio again. The number no longer exists. I went to the building's address, but I couldn't find it. Where the old building used to be, there is now an empty lot, surrounded by rusty siding. I asked a street vendor who was there, and he said that the building was demolished months ago after an unexplained fire. Before leaving, the salesman told me that I knew the story. I replied no. They said there was a small locked room there, where they locked a child a long time ago. The building caught fire out of nowhere, but when firefighters arrived, they only found wet footprints leading outside. I couldn't respond. The smell of rust returned immediately, strong and suffocating. And when I looked at the ground, I saw the same wet footprints leading to my feet. My name is Raphael. I'm 41 years old, and about 6 months ago, I started working as a night janitor at an old school in the city center. The building is over 80 years old and still preserves many original features. Wooden corridors that go with every step, flat glass windows, and a somewhat nostalgic atmosphere that, at night, seems to transform into something completely different. At first, I thought it would be a calm job. The school is empty after 10 p.m. and my job is basically to check doors, turn off lights, and make rounds across the 3 floors. But from my first week, I noticed something strange. Every night, without exception, I heard the children coming from the attic, the floor above the 3rd, where, according to the director, no one had set foot for years. The noises always started between midnight and 1 in the morning. They were dry, like wood giving way, followed by something that resembled slow steps. Sometimes it sounded like furniture was being dragged across the floor. I asked Mr. Claudio, the oldest caretaker, if anyone used the space. He just made the sign of the cross and said, "That attic was sealed up after an accident a long time ago. If you hear noise, you probably didn't hear it." I laughed uncomfortably at the time, but the next night when I heard the footsteps again, the laughter died in my throat. They weren't random noises. They were rhythmic, as if someone was walking from one side to the other. The following nights became more tense. Whenever the clock struck midnight, I anticipated those children. The pattern was the same: slow steps, creaking wood, and then that heavy dragging, as if someone was moving a huge movement across the floor. What made me most uncomfortable was the constancy. It didn't seem like a coincidence, something that happened every now and then. It was every night, at the same time, always with that rhythm, that invisible presence moving in the attic. I began to make my rounds faster, avoiding the hallway that led to the locked door on the 3rd floor. But last Wednesday, something changed. The noise became more intense, much more intense. It was almost 1 in the morning when the sound started. First, the steps, then the dragging. But this time, it came with absurd force, as if it were pushing a giant closet. With each movement, the ceiling shook, and fine dust fell through the gaps in the boards. I grabbed my flashlight and went into the hallway. When I pointed the beam of light upward, I saw what seemed impossible. The attic door, which had always been covered with thick boards, now had an open crack. The boards were still nailed down, but there was a space between them, and through that gap, I saw something pass quickly, like a small, pale hand withdrawing in the dark. My heart raced instantly. I put the flashlight away and took a few steps back. It could just be an illusion, some strange reflection. But that hand, it didn't look like a trick of light. She was sharp, with long, slender fingers and nails that reflected the beam for a second, before disappearing into the darkness. I called Mr. Claudio, but he didn't answer. I stood there, not knowing what to do, until I heard something that froze me completely. A low, childish laugh coming from that crack. The sound was irregular, somewhat choked, as if the child's throat was dry. The flashlight shook in my hand as I looked up again. The laughter stopped, but then something fell from the gap. An old, dirty piece of fabric that floated to the floor. I picked it up carefully and saw that it was a faded blue school bow, like the one used on old school uniforms. I couldn't work anymore that night. I locked the main doors and left, claiming to be unwell. The next day, I arrived early and went straight to the archives room. I dug through the old records until I found a dusty folder titled 1983 Accident. Inside, there was a photo of a group of children and, in the last row, a girl with her hair tied with a blue bow. The caption read, Class 4B, Death of Ana Luisa, due to a fall in the attic. The document described that a girl fell while trying to retrieve a toy from the attic, which was later sealed. My hands were sweaty when I closed the folder. I looked at the clock. It was 10 minutes until midnight. At midnight, I did what I had been avoiding for weeks. I went up to the 3rd floor and faced the attic door. The smell of old wood and dust permeated the hallway, and the silence was suffocating. But as soon as I got closer, the sound returned. First the slow steps, then the heavy dragging. I took a deep breath, painted the bunch of keys, and started testing them one by one. On the 3rd try, I heard a metallic click. The door, which should have been sealed for years, opened with a slow creak. The flashlight illuminated the space, a large, dusty, and apparently empty room. But in the center, with its back to me, was a wooden chair, and on the floor around it, clear drag marks, as if the furniture had been pulled there recently. I entered slowly, feeling the floor creaking beneath my feet. The air was thick and humid. The flashlight revealed details that gave me goosebumps. On the floor, marks of small bare feet ran from the chair to the opposite wall, and on that wall, someone had scrawled, in irregular, scratchy letters, "Play with me." The light flickered in my hand as I heard laughter again, now right behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. The chair, however, was now facing my direction, and on the seat was the blue ribbon, folded carefully. The air became heavy, as if the environment itself had held its breath with me. My instinct screamed to get out of there, but my legs left aside. The chair, which had previously been facing away from me, now faced me, and that sent a shiver up my spine. I looked at the blue bow on the seat, reluctant to touch it. But before I could decide, a noise behind me made me turn around immediately. It was a dull thud, as if something had suddenly fallen. When I shined a light on the opposite wall, the blood drained from my face. An old toy, one of those old metal tops, was spinning by itself on the floor in slow circles. It spun without losing strength, without stopping. And then, as if someone had blown lightly, he came rolling toward me and stopped at my feet. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want answers. I just wanted to get out. I took a step back, ready to run. But the attic door closed with a bang, making the flashlight fail for a second. The sound of dragging returned, only this time it wasn't from the ceiling. It was everything. Inside the attic. The chair creaked slightly, as if someone had just sat on it. My entire body panicked. I forced the door, but the lock wouldn't budge. And then I heard, right next to my ear, a childish whisper, soft but anxious. "Are you here to play?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. My hair stood on end and my mind went into pure survival instinct. Without thinking, I turned and shined the flashlight against the chair. The impact made a crash in the suffocating silence, and the flashlight bounced off the floor, spinning and sending jagged beams of light across the attic. For a second, clarity hit the wall, and I saw. Not just footprints, handprints, small fights scattered throughout the wood, as if someone had tried to hold on, trying to get out of there. The chair was now on its side, but the blue ribbon was still lying on the floor. The air became even heavier, and a new sound filled the room. Solutions, low, trembling. A child crying, as if he had been left alone. My heart raced. I didn't want to open it. I just wanted to leave. I whispered to no one, or to whatever was there. Suddenly the crying stopped. The attic door opened quietly, creaking slowly. Don't expect anything else. I ran without looking back, taking the stairs 3 at a time. When I arrived at the ground floor, Mr. Claudio was standing at the exit door, looking at me with a heavy look. "You opened it, right?" was all he said. I grabbed my things and left without answering. The next day, I asked for a mission. I never went back to real school, but sometimes during the early hours of the morning, I hear a metal top spinning by itself on the floor of my apartment. It always starts slowly, almost imperceptibly, but each night it seems to spin longer. Moving apartments should be exciting, but in my case, it was more strange than anything. The place was small, but perfect for me. Living room, bedroom, integrated kitchen, and an old built-in closet, one of those heavy wooden ones that creak when opened. Everything seemed normal for the first 48 hours. But on the third night, I noticed something strange. I turned off the light in the living room and, while playing with my cell phone, I noticed the reflection in the window. There, right behind me, was the silhouette of a man. I was frozen. The shape was clear. Broad shoulders, head tilted slightly to the side. I turned my body in reflex, slowly, trying not to make any noise. When I worked up the courage, I turned around and turned on the light. There was no one. Think of all the rational possibilities. Shadow of some furniture, reflection of something outside. But it doesn't make sense. There are no buildings nearby, and the window looks directly onto a vacant lot. I turned off the light again. The silhouette was still there, and it seemed closer this time. The heart raced. He turns on the light again, and once again, the man is gone. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But when I brushed my teeth, I noticed something strange on the bathroom mirror. A handprint on the wall next to the door brush, too tall to be mine. The next day, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. I left early, worked all day, and came back at night. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. As soon as I entered the apartment, the smell of damp wood warmed me, a smell that wasn't there before. I looked around and without thinking, my eyes went straight to the closet in the room. The door was open. I'm pretty sure I closed it before leaving. I walked there, took a deep breath, and opened the door once. Nothing but a few boxes and empty space. I closed and traveled hard. I turned off the light, looked at the window. The silhouette was there again. Only this time the arms were facing the body, as if they were about to take a step. My instinct was to turn on the light immediately. The reflection disappeared. I felt on the couch with my heart racing, and decided that first I would understand what was happening. I took my cell phone, positioned it on top of the shelf pointing at the closet and the window, and left it recording. Then I went to my room, locked the door and tried to sleep. But every little creak from the floor made me catch my breath. At 3:12 a.m., I heard a long creaking sound coming from the living room, the unmistakable sound of the closet being opened. I remained motionless until dawn. As soon as the sun came up, I got up, grabbed my cell phone, and stopped recording. My finger was shaking when I opened the video. The footage showed an empty room for a long time. At around 3:12 a.m., exactly when I heard the sound, the closet door started to open by itself, slowly, as if someone was pushing it from inside. My heart raced. When the door was completely open, a figure walked out. Man. Tall, thin, with his head tilted to the side, exactly like the silhouette I saw, without a reflection. He was wearing something dark and loose, like an old coat. His face was blurred, but it was possible to see that he was looking directly at the camera. For a few seconds, he stood still. Then he took a step towards the sofa. One more step, and more hum. He stopped right in front of the camera and stood there, motionless, with his head still bowed. Suddenly, his arm slowly moved and appeared towards the window. But not for the reflection. He pointed to the camera. For me. The video ended soon after, with the screen suddenly going black. I threw the cell phone on the couch, panting. I ran to the closet and found it closed. But this time, the lock was broken, as if someone had forced their way out from inside. My first impulse was to run out of the apartment, but when I opened the door, I saw that the hallway was deserted and silent, lit only by the dim light of emergency lamps. The elevator seemed too far away, and the thought of going down the stairs alone made me even more nervous. I closed the door and leaned my back against it, trying to think. The smell of damp wood was stronger. I looked at the closet. The door, which I had just checked, was ajar again. Fear paralyzed me. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but my feet wouldn't move. Suddenly, the closet creaked again. But that time, it didn't open again. You hear breathing coming from inside. Long, paused, as if someone was trying to remain silent. I took out my cell phone with my shaking hands and called the police. The call dropped. I tried again, and all I heard was a hiss. In the middle of this hiss, a voice appeared, hoarse and low. You saw me. Through the window. The cell phone slipped out of my hand. The closet creaked once again, now with the sound of something scraping the wood, inside. Retreating seemed impossible. Suddenly the noise stopped. A dense silence took over the room. That's when I noticed. The window behind me went completely dark. I looked in the reflection and saw the man there, standing right behind me, with his head tilted and a pale, formless smile. But it wasn't the reflection. It was him, inside. I turned my body on impulse and didn't see anyone. But the smell of damp wood was now unbearable. The closet, which had previously only been requested, was now wide open. The ground around him was wet, as if someone had walked out with soaked feet. I picked up my cell phone, but the screen was frozen in the last scene of the video. The man stopped in front of the camera, pointing at me. I ran out into the hallway, knocked on the nearest neighbor's door, but no one answered. When I looked back, the door to my apartment was ajar, and in the darkness beyond the entrance, I could see his silhouette standing in the hallway, motionless. I went down the stairs 2 at a time and left the building barefoot, my heart exploding. I spent the night in the car, parked on the corner, looking out the window of my apartment. At 3 a.m. sharp, the light in the room flickered. In the glass, I saw his reflection again, standing, looking directly at me from above. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was another silhouette next to him, a smaller figure with the head also tilted. The cell phone, which I left on the passenger seat, vibrated. On the screen, a call appeared. Unknown number. I answered with a trembling voice. On the other side, the same slow breathing. Then the voice. Now, we both see you. Through the window. I looked at the car window and, without a reflection, the man was there, behind me. So what would you do if you saw something like this in your own home? Would you have the courage to continue living there? Or would you run away, right away? Tell me here in the comments. I want to know your opinion on this story. And look, if you like this video and want more scary stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This is very important so you don't miss any new content that could change the way you see the world around you. And don't leave yet. The next video that will appear on the screen has an even more disturbing story. Click now and get ready for something even darker. See you there. Until the next video.